I wanted to impress her. She was intelligent, but she thought I was I tried to impress her. She was intelligent, but she thought I took a class in college. She was 23, maybe. I was only 17. I felt like I was the Mac Daddy. Her nervous laughs had me seeing her in a new light. I suddenly became aware of the red hots in her hair. It struck me we were simply two human beings talking. She wasn't any different from me. I tried to impress her. She was intelligent, but she thought I took a class in college. She was 23, maybe. I was only 17. I felt like I was the Mac Daddy. Her nervous laughs made me see her in a new light. I suddenly became aware of the red hots in her hair. It struck me we were simply two human beings talking. She was just like me. Wealth, better jobs, better opportunities, broken promises. The city leaders took it all, gave us the streets. High-rise scrapers for the richie, but not for me. High-rise scrapers for the richie, but not for me. High-rise scrapers for the richie, but not for me. High-rise scrapers. High-rise scrapers for the richie, but not for me. High-rise scrapers for the richie. High-rise scrapers for the richie, but not for me. High-rise scrapers for the richie, but not for me. High-rise scrapers for the richie, but not for me. High-rise scrapers for the richie, but not for me. High-rise scrapers for the richie, but not for me.
My own tale, second fall. What would Yeshua be like if he actually did decide to come back for the apocalypse? Link is on the video description as well as the channel page banner. And I will see you next time, Christians and non-Christians alike, when we once again take that sword of reason and reality and thrust it right through the heart of ignorance.
My home and my land was bulldozed. For this I'm angry. Makes me want to grab some guns. Makes me want to grab some guns and ammo.
Fucking bullshit.
The city promised to bring us the world. The city promised to bring us the world. They bulldozed my home. They took a land, driving me into the streets. Might makes right there. Resto pressed by. Resto pressed by. Resto pressed by. The big brother. The big brother. The big brother. brother. The big brother. The big brother. Okay, let's play some damn shit.
It's built on something, and perception is reality. To that, in that
Street whore.
But at this point, I'm full blown pursuing leaving the church.
Yeah.
Both dealing with the hell thing, internally, psychologically, and then also, what is this going to look like? How is this going to play out? How can I love these people?
Yeah.
How can I not harm them?
Come on, slut.
How can I minimize the harm?
Yeah.
And then
Start the damn game, you
justification,
whore.
not rationalization, just understanding. What do I think? What do I believe?
Yeah.
Am I
Come on, you slant-eyed whore.
leaving one
Slant-eyed slut.
fundamentalism? So I was answering all these really hard questions internally.
Come on, you slant-eyed slut.
But with this counselor and also with the help of
Yeah, come on, you fucking slant-eyed slut from China.
And ask me questions. Challenging questions sometimes. Very challenging.
As you go through that deconversion process that you described, just a long period of time where at some point you start to be honest with yourself and you start actively going to look for more information. The point I want to make here is that it's possible to criticize or to let go of a belief system before you really know where you're going to land.
Yes.
Right? You don't necessarily have a complete philosophical underpinning of humanism and naturalism and all of those things underneath you as you are letting go of theism. And that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
And it's okay to go and be curious and look at Stoics and
Yes.
look at humanistic writers, look at science or what have you, lots of things that might have been off the table. Go seek counseling, as we were just mentioning. Just being human is okay. And even after years after deconversion, if you can't completely justify a naturalistic explanation of the world,
Jesus
it's just not
fucking
your job.
goddamn
You don't have
Christ.
to do that.
No, I think a lot of it was sort of.
I wanted to win is the niggers.
I have a tendency to want to have a landing pad before I leave something.
God damn it.
But I think you're completely right. And I have given myself space not to have to commit to a lot of things. My kids call me a stoic, but I don't.
Right.
I don't call myself that, for instance. And I think humanist is a great word for it. I was very promote humanity.
Yeah.
And that exploration part, I think, it was a freeing thing to just let myself do it.
Damn, I
Read a
fucked
book
pissed.
about a former
Oh, I was facing
that
that
Why
motherfucker.
I Believed.
Now I need to win that
not
cracker
so much
ass
so
hunky.
why I
white.
felt that was in there, but it was more like why I cared. Why this was even a thing.
That's really interesting.
Damn, I fucked his butt.
Yeah, and it's freely available online, so I can read it in private browsing mode, no problem. Some people look at bad philosophy.
I'm sure that's why they invented it.
But anyway, so it's both an invigorating and very scary time for me at this point.
God damn
I'm
it.
thinking through how is this going to play out? What does this look like? Am I going to get excommunicated? Am I going to get dragged before the church? Are people going to send me angry emails? And I had a long list of potentially scary
God
things
damn it.
that could happen.
Yeah.
And I knew that I was making them up, but I was sort of just like, I wanted to see it in writing and remind myself why I'm trying to be careful.
Uzi, Jewel Scott's arms.
Because of people I love.
Has she got Jewel Scott's arms?
Die-hard Christians.
Right.
They would die for their faith, like I would 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to harm these people, and I don't want to make them think that I think they're idiots, and I don't want to just all of a sudden conjure up images of Christopher Hitchens sneering at them whenever they look at me.
Right.
That was a hard time. But
Has she got Jewel Scott's arms?
2018, I revealed to my wife that I was having doubts. And come to find out later that she had basically gone through all her grieving at that point, just immediately. She was, I think, putting what I was reading and all these other things, she came to the conclusion before I did.
Right.
I mean, I had already had suspicions, but I hadn't committed to myself.
My wife describes it similarly. She says that when I finally talked to her about my doubts, that's when she felt like I was being honest, and that he felt like I was faking it prior to that. I don't quite see it that way, but I appreciate the perspective.
Now fuck it and bring that goddamn phone down.
Yeah.
People that we love know us in a way that we can be blind to.
Yeah. So I let her know, and you know, I kept praying for meals. We kept praying together at bedtime. I would pray with the kids at night at bedtime.
I
would pray out loud at church. I was a guitar player at church. You know, at that point it wasn't hypocrisy, really. Although it started getting to be more like that. Came out to my youngest brother. We were all getting together as in a family group. And he's in one part of the country, and my middle brother's in another part of the country. And then we all got together for Christmas, and I got
the goddamn game.
Basically said, I've gathered you here. Yes. I think I'm not a Christian anymore. He's like, oh. Which that was, you know, the whole feeling alone thing. That's just hard.
You goddamn
all the
slut.
people you really care about, you can't tell. Because, well, for a long time, I wasn't even sure, so I did not want to cause trouble that was unnecessary. And then eventually, I wanted as much as possible to play it out on my own terms.
Stop myth God fucking game.
Yeah.
And so, that was a relief to
I
me
don't
to
want to
have
be the
two
fucking
people
game. I
who
want to play
close
the next
know
fucking
about it. Very
game.
much of a relief.
And it's cathartic in that you can feel the weight of this truth about yourself. I imagine that people in the LGBTQ community feel the same way. You know this thing about yourself.
Now fuck if I bring this pole down
the
here.
people who love you the most
Yeah.
don't know it. Maybe they know it intuitively, but not because you haven't stated it outright. And then
Move, you
when you're
whore.
able to do that, someone you trust, someone you love, someone who's not going to run away screaming,
Yeah.
it's incredibly freeing.
Yes, it is. That's right. You're free to be who you are. Yeah, later on, I had an experience where I went on a business trip and then visited my youngest brother.
Move, you
Hung out with him
whore.
and his wife. And then a month later, we had a full
I'm
family
gonna get an ear,
get-together,
you
and he said,
rook.
you know, you were very different when you were with us from what you are now. I thought, that's interesting.
Yes.
More relaxed, I think is what he said. So at this point, I did a study of I read The Language of God, which is by Francis Collins, the guy who did the Human Genome Project, committed Christian, loves C.S. Lewis, wrote a book on why Christianity is correct and also why evolution is correct. Studied through that, met with one of my pastors for the first time about my doubts.
Okay.
His counsel to me was to stop reading the works of man and to just read the Bible and focus on the Bible and prayer. And I thought, the Bible is part of the problem. And so is prayer. But I did it. I know I tried.
Right.
I couldn't really pray. It's very difficult. But I did. I started a study of creation and Genesis and wrote out a bunch of stuff. Also started reading a book called Why Evolution is True. So books helped me along the way. A lot of fiction.
Come on, you whore.
Jayber Crow is a book by Wendell Berry. Just a wonderful book. If you like trees, nature, and humanity, it's a wonderful book. And he has a faith crisis. It's very different in nature from mine, but he sort of just comes to a peace with it at the end, and he's a person with people.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. So anyway, not to list all my books, but
You know what we'll do is I'm going to have you email me a list of books that you recommend, and we'll just put those in.
Move, whore!
And people can pick up some of the things. Because I know I won't be able to catch all the ones you've mentioned.
Sure. And they might not speak to everybody. I even read a book called How Not to Be Secular, which is a book for Christians by a Christian, but it was very honest.
Okay.
And the fundamental thesis of the book is, there is no going back to the Middle Ages when it's convenient that everyone around you is perfectly the same spiritually as you are. There is no going back away from modernity where many different kinds of worldviews are living like this with each other. You know, and there's constant pressure against your own worldview.
God
Here are
damn
your
it.
choices. You can wall yourself off, influence, etc. And very refreshing book, very helpful book. I've read it twice. So, and I don't think I got out of it what he was intending.
Right.
Ooh, jeez.
I sometimes feel defensive for the people that I interview, and this is what I mean.
Sure.
This is what I mean. A lot of
jeez.
the pastoral apologetic class hear your story and pick apart what you did right or wrong. And
Yes.
one of the things they'll pick apart is that you read the Stoics, you did read humanistic authors and things. And it's like the entire point is, if faith and the claims of Christianity are true, they should easily withstand the superficial level of scrutiny that we're describing here. We're not talking about a super critical analysis. We're just talking about just posing the question, what if this weren't true? And it crumbling to the ground.
Yeah. In fact, I consciously avoided anti-Christian works. I read works that were defensive, works that were for something else, but I avoided consciously. I have not read a word of Bart Ehrman, for instance. Not a word. And I may someday. I don't know, but it was a very conscious decision. And I want to think about this further, but there's something about that. If you pursued these things and you fell away, and it's your fault, then I wonder. I have this line of reasoning. Well, what is assurance? They talk about assurance of faith, and I had assurance of faith, and I fell away. I mean, what good is your assurance?
Yes.
I mean, I don't say that because that would be unkind, but that's kind of where my mind goes. But I totally get it.
It's interesting.
Suck
You're describing
my dick, bitch.
a emotion, maybe it's the wrong word, that I've had as well, in that just by stating where you stand, that you no longer believe in God, that you no longer believe in Christianity, makes or implies a negative statement about someone else's faith.
Yes.
One of the challenges that I've had, especially talking with my wife, is to try to explain to her that,
You bitch.
of course we disagree on some level, but that I love her for who she is, which includes
You suck
her
my
faith,
dick,
right?
bitch.
And that I'm not interested in humiliating, making fun of, poking holes in her faith. I have zero interest in that. I care about her. And so there's this weird dichotomy of,
Suck my dick, bitch.
I can't help that there are implications based on just me stating where I'm at. And at the same time, trying to be as respectful as I possibly can of the people who I love, who are,
Suck
like
my
you said, all around
my
me,
dick,
who have
bitch.
dedicated and
Suck
real
my
life-changing
dick, bitch.
faith that it makes them very good
You
human
suck my
beings.
dick, bitch.
Yeah, that's right. It is a shame. I have nothing you can
You
do about
suck
it. Nothing
my
I can do
dick,
about
bitch.
it aside from be kind
Yeah.
and be listening. Now, I will say there's
You
a
suck
weird
my
dynamic,
dick,
and this
bitch.
is sort of skipping ahead, but there is a weird dynamic of, since I'm surrounded by it, I'm still attending church, virtually at this point, but still attending church, and so there is this sort of defense mechanism going on all the time.
Suck
it's like,
my
you
dick,
say
bitch.
that, but blah, blah, blah. There's a Tetris effect there. There's a sort of a mind pattern that ends up happening, so that when my daughter says
God
something like
damn it.
at the dinner table, like, well, how can you have morality without God? Well, actually, let's start by describing the world first, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, and then that's not a good place to go.
Come on, dick sucker.
That's not, start, because that really ends up being
Suck my
de facto
dick, bitch.
attack, even though I'm stating a positive case for
Right.
perspective, which is exactly what you're saying.
God damn it.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, so
God damn
September of last year, I had met with pastors a couple times. I was very clearly not getting better. You talked about the resurrection
God damn it.
being the thing, and that never was really for me. Logically, I didn't go that route, but my pastor did. He said, you should read this book by N.T. Wright. This thing.
Yeah, yes.
God damn it.
That's quite a commitment, yes.
He said, well, I'll actually just read these chapters. So I paid for the book, bought it. I was genuinely interested in doing study. I read the book, the parts of it, and just it's like, okay, you're saying a bunch of stuff. You know how much work it's going to be for me to actually look into all these things that you're saying from either side. You know, it's like, it's just,
Jesus,
it was a big challenge. But anyway, I had met with the pastors a couple times. They had been very kind and passionate, but one of them said, do you think it might be wise to step down from all the things you're doing?
Yeah.
Guitar, board member of a school that I helped start. I had the church opening, closing, and that sort of thing.
Right.
So I did. I stepped down. September.
Okay. And this was somewhat public, or did you just resign and walk away, or?
It was only public insofar as not being there ever again.
Got it. Okay.
No, you fucking whore.
Jimmy, is your hand hurt? People were very kind. I mean, people were thankful for my guitar playing and very kind and they didn't. Only one of them, and this is just who he is.
Come on, you
only
fucking
one of them
bitch.
was saying, "So when are you going to start playing again?"
Yeah.
Everybody else was like, "I miss your playing."
I miss you. I love you so much.
That's right. he was the non-southerner. Anyway, so at this point, the church does a 5-week series on biblical reliability, and I'm listening, and I'm like, this is very interesting to hear from the other side. Resigned from the board that December last year. My pastor suggested I meet with the church apologetics guy. And I call him the church apologetics guy, sort of as a joke. I mean, he's very much into apologetics. He was my co-teacher in the class that I taught, and I was like,
God damn it,
can't be good. But so we met in January. It was fine. Stressful time.
God fucking.
My church, they recommended the same thing. They were like, wouldn't you want to talk to these 3 people? And I was like, are you sure those 3 people want to talk to me? It goes both ways.
Yeah. So at this point, I'm listening to all the voices of deconversion and all the life after and all the graceful atheist and all the what else? There was other.
Because that was fucking stupid.
Yeah. Okay. And I had never done podcasts before, so this is this new life area I have to carve out time-wise, which is okay when you're driving places, but when you're not driving places, it sort of dries up. Yeah, so January, I told my wife that I was planning to resign. Stopped praying with her. I prayed at meals with the kids.
You stupid motherfucker.
Basically, just pretending at that point.
I imagine that there was not a variety of different responses.
Stupid idiot.
Third episode I had with a guy named Matt the Cook is his Twitter handle. And he's a fascinating person because he described being religious but not spiritual. In other words, he practices religious disciplines like prayer as an atheist. Definitely an atheist, but he practices these things. One of the ways that I've been able to kind of square the circle with family members who, they pray before every meal, and I'm personally uncomfortable with being the person saying the words, but I'm fine with holding hands with the group and being quiet. And what I hear from them is, we love our family, right? Yes. That prayer is, we love each other. We are bonding with one another. We are sharing this meal as a ritual as much as just hanging out with each other. And that's what just fine. If you're an atheist, you don't have to be scared of that.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's not.
Yeah, I close my eyes.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, it doesn't scare me at all. I think I understand exactly where you're at with that.
Yeah. It's awkward though. I mean,
I just shit in my
particularly when you
pants.
prayed at bedtime with your wife all your marriage, and then one night you don't.
Yeah.
What comes next? And that's actually one of the bullet points.
Man, this is fucking boring.
I can't keep praying with my wife.
Ouch.
Yeah, ouch for her too, and so she's brokenhearted, of course, and so we talked about how to tell the kids, and she said she didn't want me to attack Christianity, and I agreed. Still do. But I said I wanted to let them ask.
Come on, you damn fucking slut. God damn it. Jesus fucking Christ. Start the goddamn video, you goddamn son of a goddamn bitch. You goddamn motherfucker. Goddamn motherfucker. Come on, you motherfucker. God damn it.
Alright everybody, this will be part one of a two-part series in which I share with you my intellectual and spiritual journey. In this video, I'll be discussing my journey into the Orthodox Church, my time as an Orthodox Christian, Eastern Orthodox I should say, and then why it is that I chose to leave. And then I'll conclude this video with some pastoral advice to those who are considering becoming Orthodox and to those who are considering leaving Orthodoxy. And my advice may surprise you, so I'd ask that you stick around to the end for that. Second part, part two, will be another video in which I discuss my time in Roman Catholicism. I am now an Anglican deacon in a traditional Anglican church, and so obviously I'm no longer in either of those communions. I've sat on this video, or these two videos, for a long time. And there basically are two reasons for that. One is I actually still have tremendous admiration and respect for both of these traditions. I think they're beautiful traditions that are deep, intellectually deep and spiritually deep, and that produce beautiful Christians, generally speaking beautiful Christians, great saints even, of course. And so I have admiration for both of these traditions, and I've been reluctant to be critical of them.
Move, you whore.
I am kind of deeply aware that it seems to me the principal teaching of St. Augustine on the nature of schism is that schismatics, and the archetypal schismatics in the early church were the Donatists. The Donatists had hatred for their Christian brothers and sisters, and they considered themselves to be the one true church. The Catholic Church was not a part of it, and they principally, though, they hated the brethren. And so criticism can be a kind of a form of hatred, maybe a low-level form of hatred, and I've just been sensitive that I try not to be critical. I think I'm by nature a critical person, and so I'm trying not to be that way, and I certainly don't want to hate Orthodox Catholics or other Protestants that I happen to disagree with, okay, but are nevertheless, as we'll see in this video, I believe to be Christians. Alright, so Orthodoxy. Why did I become Orthodox in the first place? This will be the shortest part of the video just because in some ways my story is not unique. But just briefly, I was raised in an evangelical Protestant home. I've got deep Protestant roots on both sides of the family. My paternal grandfather and maternal grandfather were both pastors. My father, while never an ordained pastor, served in basically music ministry his whole life, his whole adult life, and has been an elder in various churches. I've got uncles and cousins that are pastors or are in ministry in some way.
Get on with the goddamn story.
And then, so it's deep in my family to be Protestant and devout as well. And I, as a teenager, was introduced to theology through reading R.C. Sproul's The Holiness of God. That was the first theology book that I read as a 14-year-old, and I fell in love with theology and started to read and started to consider church history as well. I went to Biola, and I was in the Torrey Honors Institute. I was not a very good student, but there at Biola, my freshman year, I was introduced to the Church Fathers, I would say more deeply, still on a kind of superficial level, but in high school I had only read Augustine's Confessions, but now I was introduced to the Apostolic Fathers, and to, I think it was like Athanasius on the Incarnation, maybe Cyril on the Unity of Christ. I forget what other texts we read at the time, but introduced to the Church Fathers. And of course, when you read the Church Fathers, if you're from an evangelical background in contemporary America, it can be disjointing because you're like, well, what's going on here? These guys don't sound very much like the evangelicalism that I was raised in, the form of Christianity that I was raised in. What's that about? They're talking about sacraments, they're talking about bishops and the church, and the way that they're talking about salvation sounds kind of different, foreign to me. And so that was intriguing. And of course I started to wrestle with the relationship between the Reformation and the pre-Reformation church. And I decided, mostly through the influence of my brother-in-law, who had become a Lutheran, a confessional Lutheran, to start attending a confessional Lutheran church while I was at Biola. And unfortunately, as I found out subsequently, the confessional Lutheran church that I was a part of was not actually confessionally Lutheran. It was really and truly antinomian. So the culture of the LCMS in my region, I can't speak for the whole LCMS at the time, I'm sure it wasn't this way, but the LCMS in the Southern California region, in the confessional circles, tended to be just very antinomian.
You slut.
People thought that Christianity was reducible simply to being justified by faith. That's all it was about. And that actually, if you spoke about victory over sin, the Spirit's empowering work to live victoriously, to grow in sanctification, to grow in righteousness, that was dismissed as pietism or Wesleyanism, and it was derided. And this spiritual culture was actually toxic for me. And then on top of that, if you know anything about confessional Lutherans, they tend to be kind of aggressive in their, maybe, or even hostile to anybody who's not Lutheran. So even Calvinists, other Protestants, Calvinists, and certainly evangelicals. And I kind of imbibed that culture. It was not good for me. As a young man, it was not good for me. And then add to that, I was in a
goddamn poems.
My moral life was in disarray. So there's like this kind of aggressive hostility to other Christians, and then my moral life, especially pertaining to the seventh commandment, was in disarray. Like really bad habits that were destructive. And this is where my story is unique. I began to wrestling through reading like Schmemann and Meyendorff and other well-known Orthodox texts, thinking about it but not really convinced of the truth of Orthodoxy. And then, but also realizing, okay, there's something deeply wrong about my moral life, my spiritual life. It's things are not good, but not really knowing where to go or what to do. And for some reason, I picked up a book by Anthony Krapovitsky, who was a late 19th century, early 20th century hierarch of the Russian Orthodox Church. The work was called Confession, a series of lectures on the mystery of repentance. And in this work, he basically is trying to help the priests of his archdiocese as they are treating penitents who are coming to them in confession, how to help them be healed, essentially, of their spiritual pathologies. And I will say that I remember it was February of 2007. I was in a Starbucks reading this work, and I heard the Lord's voice for the first time in my life. I can say with something approximating near certainty that I heard the Lord speak to me. It was crystal clear in the depths of my heart. It was not audible, but it was in my interior being, and it was very clear. And I won't share with you what he said because it's intimate, but it had to do with repentance. And after this night of hearing his voice,
God damn it,
reading this book, I came away from that experience, one, with this newfound, profound sense of God's reality and presence to me, and this like incredible desire to,
I got one word of
repent,
advice
to change
you
my
resign,
life,
you bitch.
and to seek the Lord in a new way. And because this experience was mediated through an Orthodox writer, I thought, man, this is it. I need to become Orthodox. I need to become Orthodox. And so all of the intellectual problems that I had with Orthodoxy were put to the side, or I would say they just dissipated, because I had this new profound awareness of the reality of God, and I dove into Orthodoxy with both feet, and really became a hardcore Orthodox Christian. I got connected in a church in Southern California called St. Barnabas in Costa Mesa, and this was a warm, gracious community of Christians that really welcomed me with open arms. And the church has an interesting history. They were formerly a part of the Evangelical Orthodox Church, which was a non-canonical group of essentially evangelical Christians who discovered the early church and wanted to become Orthodox, and started to kind of, as I understand it, transform their communities to look more Orthodox. But they were eventually canonically brought into the church through the Antiochian Archdiocese. So I would say 98% of the people in this church were either former evangelicals or former Protestants more broadly. And I was welcomed into this church, and unfortunately, though, I was rebaptized. So the Antiochian Archdiocese, the normal procedure, the normal way in which converts are received is through chrismation. Those converts who've been baptized in another church, another Christian community outside of the Orthodox Church. And I decided, in fact, to be rebaptized. And that was my decision, and I made a petition, and I was given the go-ahead for that, and I was rebaptized. Unfortunately, I wish that I could take that back, but it is what it is. Now, the reason for that, it's interesting. Oftentimes you'll hear stories of people who were raised in the Catholic Church, and then maybe they didn't feel like they knew God very deeply, and then they have some sort of awakening experience or conversion experience in their early adult years. And then because of that new awareness of God that they come into through their conversion, they tend to look back on their Catholic experience as being kind of utter darkness. And unfortunately, I kind of had that experience, but in reverse. So because of my experience immediately coming out of the kind of toxic Lutheranism that I was in, that was antinomian and not helpful to my spiritual life, and because I then kind of associated all Protestantism with the heresies of Martin Luther and the spiritual damage that it causes, I came out of this spiritual awakening that I had back in February of 2007, and then kind of looked back on my former Christian life prior to that as kind of utter darkness. And so because of that, I thought, well, I want to get baptized. I want to get rebaptized. Of course, I didn't think my first baptism was legit, so I got rebaptized. So anyway, I wish that I wouldn't have done that, but it is what it is. Now,
why do you wish that?
As I came into the Orthodox Church, was sacramentally received into it, I really, as I said, became a hardcore Orthodox Christian. So what did that look like? I took the life of prayer very seriously. I met with my spiritual father and received a rule of prayer and kept that diligently, prayed morning and evening prayer every day, started to pray the Jesus prayer consistently, and really grew to love the life of prayer. I went to services all the time, basically every service that I could attend.
Fucking nerves.
And took the fasts of the church very seriously, tried to abide by those, and then also visited monasteries. So I went to St. Anthony's in Arizona a couple of times, and I went to St. Herman of Alaska in Platina. That's Father Seraphim Rose's monastery. And then I went to, I think it's now defunct, but I went to St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco in Manton, California. I went there a couple times as well. And then, of course, continued my reading habits, read everything that I could about the Orthodox Church and everything from theology to the spiritual writings of the Church, including, of course, including the Philokalia. Not the whole thing, but I read selections, portions of that.
Suck my dick.
And I started, I think, to embrace the more kind of rigorist or traditionalist perspective. Now, again, because I was rebaptized and because I associated my former life with kind of utter darkness, the rigorist perspective made most sense to me.
Suck my dick, bitch.
That's what I began to embrace, and unfortunately, even though I could kind of experience the effects of the grace of God on my heart in changing my heart for the better, I also started to become very critical of anybody and hostile even to those who were not Orthodox. So that comes into the kind of second major problem that I have with Orthodoxy that led me ultimately out of the church. Anyone who is familiar with contemporary Eastern Orthodoxy knows that, generally speaking, and there are of course exceptions, but generally speaking, it is at best suspicious of and at worst hostile to the Western theological tradition. So this is evident in everything from the popular literature of people like Frederica Matthews Green and Clark Carlton to the academic literature of people like Christos Ioannaris and most famously Father John Maimonides. The anti-Western animus is pervasive in contemporary American Orthodoxy. And when I first converted, I drank deeply from this fountain because I believed that it faithfully represented the Orthodox tradition, and I wanted to be a faithful Orthodox Christian. Following the influence of Father Maimonides in particular, and he was probably the most influential Greek theologian of the 20th century, there are two doctrines in particular that tend to get criticized or outright rejected in the milieu of contemporary Orthodoxy. So the first is original sin, and the second is the doctrine of vicarious satisfaction. And I think that both of these, I've come to see that both of these are absolutely essential for a Christian understanding of the fall and redemption. And I think that the deeper you dive into the Orthodox tradition itself, even the Eastern tradition, these doctrines are present there as well, as we'll see. But Father Maimonides, if you want to get a sense for the contemporary landscape, I would encourage you to simply read the introduction to his work, The Ancestral Sin.
He's really starting to piss me off, swollen like he is.
How critical
he's really starting to fucking piss me off.
The Western framework of the fall and redemption, the inherited state of sin of Adam, death as divine punishment, the reality of divine justice, Christ's vicarious satisfaction by taking the penalty of sin, our penalty of sin, upon himself. And he calls this the strong juridical character of Latin theology, which he says is not just erroneous, but dangerous. And he lays all of this, of course, at the feet of St. Augustine. And I believe and defended this for a while. But as I was exposed to more of the patristic tradition, and even more narrowly of the Eastern tradition, I came to see how superficial the contemporary Orthodox criticism of the West is, or was. One of the initial aha moments for me, or what is going on here moments, was when I read, a number of years ago, I read a work called The Life in Christ by St. Nicholas Kavasilas. He was a 14th century Byzantine theologian and saint, and probably next to St. Gregory Palamas, the most important saint of the High and Late Middle Ages, the Byzantine tradition, the Orthodox tradition. And in that work, he's got an excursus on Christ's atoning work, in which he basically recapitulates St. Anselm's theory of satisfaction, which again, I had been taught was totally foreign to the Orthodox tradition and foreign to the Orthodox mindset and even heretical. But it's clear that Kavasilas either had read Anselm himself or had possibly, I suppose, read another Orthodox writer who had himself borrowed from Anselm. But he picked up the ideas and recapitulated them in his own work with no problem whatsoever. He incorporated them into his own work, and he thought it was totally orthodox. So, and of course, I'm aware that going from St. Anselm's theory of satisfaction to the vicarious satisfaction of, say, St. Thomas Aquinas or even the Reformers, you have to take a couple more steps. I'm aware of that. But the point is that according to Ramadides and company, according to what you hear all the time, or very frequently I should say, in contemporary orthodoxy, the doctrine of Anselm himself was totally foreign to the Orthodox phronema, as they say, the mindset. But here it was. So this was a data point.
Now, Buck, move that rook right here.
A pretty significant data point that was an outlier in the narrative that I had received. And I can't go over more examples, just for the sake of expediency in getting through this. I can't go into more of these, but I had more of these sorts of experiences.
Now, move this poem right here.
St. John Chrysostom or St. Cyril of Alexandria, and you come across something that you're like, wait a minute, I thought that wasn't orthodox. I thought that's a Latin perversion or a Western perversion. So that happened quite a bit. And regarding original sin in particular, so generally speaking, it's very common to hear contemporary Orthodox, again following Father Romanides, to say that we do not inherit any sin from Adam, but merely the effects of that sin. So spiritual and bodily corruption, the tendency to sin, and preeminently death itself. But I came to see that the authoritative Eastern Orthodox position on this, on original sin, was essentially no different from the Roman Catholic position. So if you look at the Council of Carthage of 419, which is picked up at the 6th and 7th ecumenical councils, you see that there is a natural state of sin that we are all born into because we're descendants of Adam. And even if we've not yet personally sinned, we have this natural state of sin that is, and we're kind of guilty analogously, right? So we obviously are not guilty of Adam's sin personally, but because we are in him, because we are in his body, so to speak, we are descendants from him, we are guilty by analogy, and this original sin needs to be remitted in the grace of baptism. Now, so that was an eye-opening moment for me, and then, of course, it wouldn't be fair to do a video like this without touching on the filioque.
I just shit in my pants.
This is, of course, outside of papal supremacy. This is the fundamental theological issue that divides the East and the West. So let's grant, for the sake of argument, let's grant the Orthodox position on this, that they are right, that not only was it unjust for not only was it an unjust canonical violation for the Western Church to introduce the filioque into the creed outside of the conciliar process, but it also represents what St. Photius might call the sum of all heresies, that it is essentially, it reproduces, if you follow it out consistently, it reproduces all of these other formerly condemned heresies. So let's grant that for the sake of argument. Well, what follows from that? It seems to me that the problem with this position is that the Orthodox are then forced to say that the entire Western theological tradition since St. Augustine is essentially heretical regarding the doctrine of God. And this is, of course, long before the schism. Or, on the other hand, they have to retcon the Latin tradition, the fathers, the saints of the Latin West, based on later Byzantine theological developments like the energetic procession or eternal manifestation, and say the Latin fathers actually didn't teach the filioque. What they really taught was the energetic procession, and I think that's dishonest. So that's the position that the hardcore anti-filioquists hold. It seems to me is that they have to either say that the Latin Church was essentially corrupted since St. Augustine at least. And then, of course, what happens to the Catholicity of the Church? The Church wasn't in schism until the 11th century, barring, of course, a few 9th century schisms or whatever. So it wasn't majorly in schism until the 11th century. Well, then, for that whole period, the West is heretical. And then how do you make sense of the Catholicity of the Church? And then the other option, the retconning option, it seems to me just dishonest, right? It seems, as the kids would say these days, that's cope, right? That's cope. All right. So I concluded that while the Orthodox, I do think, and I still think this, they have the upper hand on the canonical position, the West should not have unilaterally introduced it into the creed. I don't think that the filioque can be called, the underlying theology of the filioque can be called heretical, as long as the monarchy of the Father is upheld. And I don't think it should be a church dividing issue. The Orthodox Church claims to be the one true church which Jesus Christ founded, and it alone has preserved inviolate the apostolic tradition. So the Nicene Creed speaks of one holy Catholic and apostolic church, and for the Orthodox, that's it. They're the church that the Nicene Creed speaks of. And any church that's outside of her canonical boundaries are heretical or in schism to one degree or another. So that includes the Oriental Orthodox, the Assyrian Church of the East, the Roman Catholics and the Unionists who are in communion with her, the Old Catholics, Anglicans, and all Protestants, everybody else, not in the one true church. And the Orthodox Church, furthermore, is the sacred repository of the grace of the Holy Spirit. And the grace of the Holy Spirit is accessed principally through the sacraments, her sacraments, and not just the sacraments, though, through the entire liturgical and dogmatic and ascetical life of the Church. And so the sacraments, especially the sacrament of baptism, is a helpful way to think about the nature and the implications of that claim. So if you're familiar with Orthodoxy today, you know that it's a matter of dispute how converts are to be received into the Church. Earlier I mentioned the fact that I was rebaptized. Okay, I chose to be rebaptized. Of course, at the time, I saw it as being baptized, not rebaptized, for reasons that will be made clear here in just a moment. But this is a matter of dispute. So for the hardliners, some insist that all converts, even if they've already been baptized in a non-Orthodox setting, should be received by baptism through triple immersion, or at least that baptism through triple immersion should be the normative means by which converts are received into the Church. Okay? And they justify receiving converts through chrismation or confession on what they call the principle of economia. So briefly, the idea of economia is the Church has the authority to adjust the rules, the house rules, so to speak, and relax them as they see fit for the purpose of the salvation of souls. And they're able, through their authority, to relax the rules and thereby kind of retroactively validate a graceless form of baptism that was received outside of the canonical boundaries of the church in a non-Orthodox setting. Others, on the other hand, they say that to be rebaptized, this would essentially be a sacrilegious act because there's only one baptism of the church, and this one baptism, though it's the possession of the church, the unique possession of the church, it can be administered outside of her canonical boundaries. Okay, and there's a long history of debate on this issue in the church. This goes back to the 3rd century. And it was settled in the West basically by the 5th century, but it hasn't really been settled in the East ever since, or at least both sides, I think, claim that it has been settled, but they disagree with each other. So it's still an ongoing issue today. And I will say this, though, as far as I know, none of the autocephalous churches today currently requires that converts be rebaptized. But it is the case on Mount Athos, for instance, and I think Rocourt. There's other people, certainly in the kind of traditional Orthodox Church, that are insistent about this. Now, within contemporary Orthodox, there exists a spectrum between the traditionalists or rigorists on one hand and the modernists or the ecumenists on the other hand. And most Orthodox seem to fall somewhere in between those two extremes, if they can be called extremes. And the traditionalists maintain that to acknowledge baptismal reality outside of the canonical boundaries of the Church would be a betrayal of the dogma of the unity and the uniqueness of the Orthodox Church, and the claim that she alone is the sole repository of the grace of the Holy Spirit. And the ecumenists claim, on the other hand, that no, acknowledging this reality of true baptisms outside of the canonical boundaries of the Church does not impinge on the Church's unity. Or they'll make claims like this: so we know where the Church is, but we don't know where it isn't. And some will go so far as to just admit that churches outside of Orthodoxy basically have ecclesial reality to one degree or another. Patrick Barnes, the curator of the traditionalists' website, Orthodox website called Orthodox Info, he asked a very salient question while still a Protestant to Father Thomas Hopko back in 1996 during a Q&A following Father Hopko's talk. And I'm taking this from Barnes' book, The Non-Orthodox, which can be found on his website. This is quoting him. He says, "If I, speaking as a Protestant, have put on Christ through baptism, and am therefore a member of his body, and if his body is the Church, then am I not also a member of the Church? And if the Orthodox Church is the one true Church, how can I not be a member of it in some sense?" Now, I think that is the most crucial question, as it gets to the heart of a number of interconnected theological issues that are at once soteriological and ecclesiological. So, St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 12:13 that by one Spirit we were all baptized.
Come on, you bitch.
Let me just say this. Thousands of years ago in a small religious town, if you were young, you were also chaste. Right? It's not like Old Town. Anyways, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son and shall call his name Emmanuel. Well, what's Emmanuel mean?
As it turns out, Mark Driscoll is a very well-known pastor out of Arizona, and he wants Jewish people to know why they should worship Jesus.
You fucked up, you son of a bitch.
And he provides a series of reasons, and I thought, well, maybe this is a good idea to explore the evidence.
And what I'm excited to do today is to answer the question, how did people know that Jesus was coming? We'll jump right in, we'll move pretty quick. 4000 BC, before Christ, Adam and Eve received the prophecy that the Messiah, Jesus, would be born of a woman. So here's the promise in Genesis 3:15. God shows up and says to Satan, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. As soon as sin comes into human history, what's really interesting is God says, I'm sending my son, I'm sending a male child into human history. He's going to overturn the curse, he's going to forgive sin, and he's going to defeat this diabolical dragon who is Satan himself.
This is probably the most compelling reason why someone should convert to Christianity. And here it goes. It says in Genesis, roughly 4000 BC, Pastor Driscoll insists that the Messiah would be sent into the world, and he would be the son of a woman, and he would defeat Satan. That's what we're told. As it turns out, if you go to the book of Genesis, he's referring to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. I am sure, if you were just watching this guy on YouTube, you go, how would he say that with so much confidence? Surely it says that somewhere in the Torah. Look it up for yourself. It isn't there. The text is in the context of God cursing the Adam, Eve, and the serpent. And there, God says that I place enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. Your seed will crush your seed will crush the head of the serpent, and the serpent can bite the heel. There's nothing here about the Messiah. There's no mention that the Messiah would defeat the devil, and if I concede all this, then this would be just another reason why Jesus could be the Messiah. Let me explain. That means if the role of the Messiah is to destroy Satan, to just concede everything, because I want to steel man this. If the role of Mashiach is to destroy the Yitzhar, the evil inclination of the world, is to destroy the devil, which is, right? Well, how did Jesus do with that? And the answer is, as far as I can tell, Satan is doing better than ever. So he didn't accomplish that either, which means this is just one more thing that Jesus didn't accomplish. The text actually says, I'll put hatred between you and the woman, because after all it was the serpent that sought to seduce the woman, so the retribution is that in fact there will always be enmity. The descendants of the woman, meaning mankind. In fact, we're told shortly after that the woman would be called Chava because she's the mother of mankind, that mankind would have a natural aversion to the serpent, and man has the ability, her descendants have the ability to destroy Satan. Conversely, Satan can only bite at the heel, which means that man has the ability to deliver a fatal blow to Satan. He can overcome him. Now, in case you wonder, like, where am I getting that from? How do I know that's what comes into view in this early part of Genesis? It's because the very next chapter we're told that in fact sin is hiding behind the door. In a conversation between God and Cain, we are told in chapter 4, verse 6 and 7, that sin is hiding behind the door. You are the desire, you are his desire, but you can't master over him. It's right there in the text. Incidentally, in Christian theology, man cannot overcome Satan. Man cannot overcome sin. There's nothing man can do to earn his way to heaven. That's the kind of language you'd hear in church. There's nothing man can do to achieve his own salvation. That's what, like, this is what the whole book of Romans is about. That's especially the case in Romans chapter 3 through 6. That's the whole point. Now, there are some Christians who would insist that because it says in Hebrew, Ve'evo Oshis Beincho Uvein Isha Uvein Zarcho Uvein Zara, between your seed and her seed. So some Christians argue that because a woman doesn't have seed, only a man has seed, meaning sperm, a woman has an ovum, so therefore this must be a reference, a clear reference to the virgin birth. This is complete nonsense. Now, it is true that the word zera, seed, can mean just that, can mean that which a man produces in order to have children. But it also can mean descendants. It doesn't mean only that. And this is a fallacy, a linguistic fallacy. So, as an example, in Genesis chapter 16, verse 10, when the angel is speaking to Hagar, he promises her, saying word, that from her seed will come a great nation. In that case, it's talking about Ishmael. So that's clearly not true. So just be very aware of that, where you have this etymological fallacy where you constrict the word zera or zara to only one possible meaning, that is like sperm in Greek. So therefore a woman doesn't have that, therefore it must be a unambiguous reference to a virgin birth. Don't buy that. That's just a game. That's just a bait and switch. So there's nothing in text. I just, encourage you to listen to the way Mark presents that. He presents us with absolute confidence that, of course, it says that the woman's going to give birth to the Messiah, and the Messiah is going to defeat the devil. You notice how he says that with that much confidence, to the point that I have no doubt that people sitting in that church listening to this sermon and why the Jews have to worship Jesus, that they're utterly convinced that there is such a verse like that. As it turns out, this claim is completely vacuous. It's made up.
700 years before Christ, Isaiah prophesies that Jesus' mother would be a virgin who conceived by a miracle, and that Jesus would be God who became a man. You guys see this every year on your Christmas card. This one shows up every year. Isaiah 7:14, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin. And there's a debate regarding whether this means a woman who is young versus a woman who is chaste. I get into all of it in the book. Let me just say this. Thousands of years ago in a small religious town, if you were young, you were also chaste. It's not like Old Town. Anyways, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Well, what's Emmanuel mean? God with us. So the virgin, miraculous supernatural birth, will give birth to a son. That son will not just be her son, but God's son, Emmanuel, God with us. Well, of course, this is all fulfilled through his mother Mary, bringing Jesus into the world.
So this is an indictment against not Mark Driscoll, but against Matthew, the author of the first gospel, chapter 1, verse 23. The verse is mistranslated, taken out of context. In fact, not only does the word virgin not appear there, but the definite article is there. Matthew would have us believe there's no definite article there, and the context has nothing to do with the birth of the Messiah. The word in Hebrew, the text says, Hine o Alma, Spain. Behold, the young woman is with a child, and she will give birth to a son, V'karoshim Emmanuel, and she will call his name Emmanuel, which means God is with us. So, it's not that in the ancient world he said that, well, young women would typically sit chaste. We'll just use conventional language. Young women in the ancient world, in ancient Israel, were certainly chaste, meaning a virgin. Well, there's nothing could be sillier. As it turns out, in the ancient world, Jewish young women got married and had babies. In fact, it's old women that don't have babies. Young women do, right? If Isaiah wanted to convey that a virgin is to conceive, there's a word that means virgin in both biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew. That's the word basula. Matthew quite deliberately altered that word in order to make it appear Christological. It doesn't say basula in Isaiah 7:14. Incidentally, the word betula, or basula, that word appears many times in the Hebrew Bible. Isaiah uses that term many times. If he wanted to speak about virginity, he would have said that. Now, you might say, well, virginity, young woman, there's some sort of relationship. He tried to convey that with a sort of some humor there, but it really is very silly. A young woman conveys two things, youth and gender, nothing else. Whereas a virgin conveys only a sexual history, so they're not related to each other. The context of Isaiah 7:14 is a sign when the Afro-Syria war would come to an end, and the king of Samaria, meaning the northern kingdom, his name is Pekah ben Ramalyahu, who formed an alliance with Ritzin, who was the king of Syria, to destroy Achaz, the southern kingdom, when they would fail. Isaiah is speaking about an immediate event, and the sign is the maturity of the child. I encourage people to read Isaiah 7, to start with verse 1. Now, this is never going to happen in church. Never. You're never going to sit in a pew and hear a pastor read off Isaiah 7 from verse 1 at least to verse 16. That cannot happen. The reason is that everyone would immediately know, become transparent, that this passage has nothing to do with the birth of the Messiah, but rather, when the two kings, the Pekah ben Ramalyahu and Ritzin, would be defeated. The sign is in verse 15 and 16. Butter and honey will the child eat when he knows to reject bad and choose good, for before the child knows to reject evil and choose good, these two kings who threaten you, they'll be destroyed. The child's name is Emmanuel, which conveys that God is with us, meaning that God will protect the southern kingdom of Judah, which was under threat. This is the name the mother was supposed to give the child. In contrast, you have in Isaiah 8, Isaiah, who's the husband, this is Isaiah's wife. Isaiah is told to name the child Maher Shalal Hashbaz, quicken, loot, hasten the booty. And you know it's the same child because before the child knows to say daddy or mommy, see Isaiah 8, verse 3 and 4, these two kings. Which two kings? The king of Samaria, meaning the northern kingdom of Israel, and Syria. Now, if this is referring to Jesus, I'd like to know, when did the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Syria go to war against Judea in the time of Jesus? This is nonsensical. In fact, the northern kingdom of Israel did not exist during the time of Jesus in the first century. The kingdom of Syria did not exist during the first century, during the time of Jesus. During the first century, both Syria and the land of Israel were part of the Roman Empire. This is what these Christians, you ask me, why do I care about Christians? People always ask me, why do I do this? Because I care. Christians are persuaded by this. As it turns out, Isaiah tells us that God gave him children. For what reason? As signs and portents to Israel. Isaiah 8, verse 18, explicitly says that. So the names of Isaiah's children are signs for in this case, the kingdom of Judah, that they will be rescued. And again, the sign is not the conception of the child or the birth of the child, but look carefully, it's the sign is the immediacy, that the child won't even be mature enough to reject bad and choose good. The child won't even be able to say daddy or mommy when these two kings would be destroyed. As it turns out, both Pekach ben Ramalyahu and Ritzin, the king of Israel, the northern king of Israel, and the king of Syria were both assassinated. So that's the immediacy. So what this does, Isaiah 7:14, it's used by Matthew, is an indictment against the Christian Bible. And do not let anyone fool you into believing that Matthew was relying on the Septuagint. You're going to hear that repeatedly from missionaries. Okay? Matthew was relying on the Septuagint. There's nowhere in the Christian Bible where the Septuagint is even mentioned. There is no Septuagint in our hands from the Christian era or before. That means that is more than 2,000 years old, with Isaiah 7:14, with the Greek word parthenos in it. The Septuagint had been worked on by many people. That means the original Septuagint, going back to roughly 256 BCE, that was penned for the Library of Alexandria by some 72 translators, was only the 5 books of Moses. You have to get this into your head, okay? The original Septuagint, which was assembled, which was translated from Hebrew to Greek, was only of the Pentateuch, only the Torah, nothing else. Now, listen very carefully. Subsequently, translating the Hebrew Bible into the Greek language became a cottage industry. There would be many Jews who would do that, all of Tanakh. Okay? We have fragments of that in the Dead Sea Scrolls of Greek translations. And this would continue into the 2nd century and 3rd century. And it was the church, I'll call him a church father, the church theologian. He was really a bright guy. No question, probably the most prolific author in the Christian world. His name is Origen. He's the one that assembles the Septuagint as we have it today. Now, they keep calling it Septuagint, but it's not the original Septuagint. So the Septuagint we have, if you went on Amazon or went online and found the Septuagint, that is a Christian product. So be very careful. The original Septuagint, that's roughly 2,200 years old, does not exist because the Library of Alexandria was destroyed, not once but many times over. The original Septuagint is lost. I demonstrate in Volume 1 of Let's Get Biblical that, in fact, even of the 5 books of Moses, it's heavily edited later on, subsequently. I showed that by using the Talmud. But that's not germane here. So don't fall for the Septuagint excuse. It's not going to get them off the hook. Christians insist that there are hundreds of prophecies that can be illustrated from your Hebrew Bible that Jesus is the Messiah. When we examine all these putative prophecies, what we discover is that they're all scandalous, they're all promiscuous, they're all filled with basically a smoke and mirrors. It's just sleight of hand. And therefore, 365 times 0 equals 0. There are no prophecies in the Hebrew Bible that speak about Jesus or Christianity. These are all invented by the church. Matthew indulges in this kind of this kind of chicanery using a passage of the Hebrew Bible more frequently than almost any other author in the New Testament. The only exception is Paul. So both Paul and Matthew are engaging in altering the Hebrew Bible in order to make it appear Christological. It's not that the Jewish scriptures are never supposedly quoted by other authors in the Christian Bible, but it's much more rare. It can be said, therefore, that Matthew was more responsible than any of anyone else. Now, when I say Matthew, we don't know who wrote the first gospel, which is using the word Matthew in quotation marks. But whoever wrote the first gospel was more responsible for the rejection of Christianity among the Jews than anyone else, because Matthew had never been written. Many more people would have stumbled into the church.
Furthermore, 700 BC, Micah prophesies that Jesus would be born in the town of Bethlehem. So Micah 5:2, but you, O Bethlehem, Ephrathah, that's the region, Bethlehem is the city, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah. From you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler or king in Israel, whose coming forth is from old, from ancient days. The original word there is from eternity. And it's saying that someone is coming from eternity, and he's entering into human history, and he's going to come to a town called Bethlehem, which is a very small, obscure, insignificant town. And we know from the story of Scripture that Mary and Joseph, they were part of the family line of David. So Joseph adopted Jesus, and he ultimately married Mary. And so what happened was the Roman government wanted to make sure they're getting all their taxes. And so they call a census, and everybody's got to go to their hometown to register. Well, Joseph, in God's providence, he's from the family line of David. The home of David is Bethlehem, so Joseph and Mary, though she's very pregnant, they have to make the journey to Bethlehem, and in the providence of God, they happen to arrive there at the very time that Jesus was born, so that the prophecy would be fulfilled that he would be born in Bethlehem, because he didn't live in Bethlehem, he just visited there for a government census.
Yeah. So what he's delivering here is Luke's version of Jesus' infancy narrative. Matthew's version contradicts it completely, but I'm going to set that aside for right now. What is key is that Micah chapter 5, verse 2 in a Christian Bible, verse 1 in a Hebrew Bible, so it's the same verse, it's just chapter break is different.
You stupid
is
bitch.
Completely misquoted. So the text tells us, in fact, that a ruler will come from Bethlehem. So if you just read the first part of the verse without the end of Micah 5:1 or 5:2, you might think that the Messiah is supposed to be born in Bethlehem. First of all, the word Mashiach isn't there, but it does say a ruler. But the key is, at the very end of the text, it says, U'maitzaisav mikedem mimei olam, and his origins are from Mikedem, which means from earlier times, Mimei Olam, from ancient days, or from earlier days, or days of old, okay? Which means that ending indicates that the Messiah is not supposed to be born in Bethlehem, but rather his connection to Bethlehem, his connection to this city is from earlier times, in that King David was born in Bethlehem. See 1 Samuel chapter 17. So it is true that King David was born in Bethlehem, and that's why Matthew and Luke are going to work very hard to have Jesus born in Bethlehem. However, they are going to independently use two completely different plot devices to make that happen. You heard Mark talk about the family originally is from
God damn it.
And they have to get down to Bethlehem because of the census, which is silly. When there's a census taken, people don't go back to the place where their family lived 1,000 years earlier. Like where would you go? Matthew has it completely the reverse. Matthew has a family originally from Bethlehem, and then they go down to Egypt because Herod the Great is looking to kill the kid, and then when they think about going back home, they're told, you better go to Nazareth because Herod Archelaus is now the ruler over Judea, and it would be very dangerous to go back to Bethlehem. I want to set that aside. Mikedem mimei olam, the word mimei olam, that phrase, which means days of. Now the word olam alone, if you take that word alone, and there's no modifier, it can mean eternity. Like Leolam Va'ed. It can mean eternity. But now when it's being made olam, it means from days of old. In fact, that phrase bime olam or keme olam appears more than once in the Tanakh.
Goddamn
fucking
Christ.
Just two chapters later, in Micah chapter 7, verse 14, we have the exact same phrase. And there, in Micah 7:14, in every Christian Bible, it then states correctly that it's from ancient times. The phrase in context is that we're hoping for the latter times when it'll be like the good old days. What Mark is doing here is he's altering it and saying eternity in order to convey that Jesus is God somehow. Now Matthew, whoever wrote the book of Matthew, is much more advanced than this pastor in that, and you won't even believe me unless you look it up. And what I'd encourage you to do
Jesus
is open up
goddamn
Micah
fucking
5,
goddamn Christ.
Micah 5:2.
Jesus fucking Christ.
And then open up to Matthew chapter 2, verse 6. You want to look at those side by side. And you'll notice that Matthew, whoever wrote the first gospel, realized that the very ending of Micah 5:2 presents an existential problem. Because the end of Micah 5:2, that and is going forth from Moitzaisa, Mikedem Me'olam, means that the relationship between the Messiah and Bethlehem is from the old days. For those of you not familiar with history, Micah lived 2,700 years ago. Micah lived the same time as Isaiah during the Assyrian Empire, okay? So just for one moment, because I realize that many people are just not familiar with the history here. So Micha, that's his real name, lived at the same time as Yeshayahu. He lived at the same time as Hosea, Hoshea. He lived at the same time as Amos. They all lived at the exact same time. Okay? During the heat of the Assyrian Empire, this is very important, roughly 2,700 years ago. Okay? That's when Micah was written. King David lived 3,000 years ago. King David lived 3,000 years ago, which means that Micah lived 300 years after King David. Do you understand? That's very important. Micah lived 3 centuries after King David. Therefore, when Micah says that the future ruler, his relationship to Bethlehem will be from the old days, is referring to 300 years ago from the city in which King David...
This is boring.
Piles of it, and it's really a good example and a testimony to the ways that Christianity really does deprive us of our... Today I'm speaking with Amy Passion. Amy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, team. Greetings to you. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's so good to see you. And you're coming to me all the way from